Trembling with hunger, Elizabeth stared in disbelief as the Apache chief pushed her wedding ring, her last chance for survival, back across the dust-covered trading post counter. His thundering declaration silenced the room. "Gold is not what we need, white woman. Your healing knowledge is what will save my dying people." Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. Arizona Territory, 1876. The merciless sun beat down upon the dusty trail, casting long shadows across the barren landscape as Elizabeth Holloway trudged forward with faltering steps. Her once fine dress, brought from Boston with such care, hung in tatters around her thin frame. The blue cotton, now faded to a ghostly gray, clung to her body, damp with sweat and stained with the red dust of a land that seemed determined to claim her as it had claimed her husband. 3 weeks had passed since she had watched Thomas's body being lowered into the unforgiving ground. 3 weeks of wandering, of sleeping beneath star-filled skies that offered no comfort, of rationing the meager supplies that remained after the fever had taken not just her husband, but their dreams of a new life in the West. Elizabeth paused, lifting a hand to shield her eyes from the relentless glare. In the distance, the crude wooden structure of Willow Creek Trading Post shimmered like a mirage. Her cracked lips formed a silent prayer as she forced her aching feet forward. It had been 2 days since her last proper meal, and the hollow ache in her stomach had become a constant companion. "Just a little further," she whispered to herself, the words catching in her parched throat. The small bundle she carried contained everything she owned in the world. A change of clothes, a tattered medical journal that had belonged to her father, and a faded daguerreotype of her parents. But it was what she wore that might save her life, the gold wedding band that Thomas had placed on her finger with such hope in a Boston church barely a year ago. As Elizabeth approached the trading post, she became aware of the small gathering of people outside, a mix of rugged settlers, travelers, and to her surprise, a group of Apache men standing slightly apart, their expressions unreadable beneath the shadow of the porch roof. The owner of the post, a heavy-set man with a beard streaked with gray, looked up as she approached. His eyes, shrewd and assessing, took in her disheveled appearance with a flicker of both pity and wariness. "Water," Elizabeth managed to say, her voice a rasp. Without a word, the man dipped a ladle into a barrel and handed it to her. Elizabeth drank deeply, the tepid liquid more precious than any wine she had ever tasted in her former life. "Thank you," she said, returning the ladle. Her gaze fell to the simple goods displayed on the rough wooden counter: bags of flour, coffee beans, dried meat, sustenance, life. With trembling fingers, she twisted the wedding ring from her finger. It caught briefly on her knuckle, as if reluctant to leave her hand, before coming free. She placed it on the counter, the gold gleaming dully in the shadowed interior of the trading post. "I need food," she said simply, dignity somehow intact despite the desperate act. "Whatever this will buy." The trading post owner picked up the ring, examining it with practiced eyes, before glancing at Elizabeth's face. Whatever he saw there, the refined features now gaunt with hunger, the educated accent that still shaped her words despite her circumstances, seemed to confirm something for him. "Boston," he said, not a question but an observation. Elizabeth nodded. "Yes. Long way from home." "My husband," she began, then stopped. There was no need to explain the common story of loss that had claimed so many who ventured west with dreams that withered like delicate plants under the harsh desert sun. The trading post fell silent, the other patrons watching the exchange with the interest of those for whom entertainment was scarce. Elizabeth felt their eyes upon her but kept her gaze steady on the ring. She would not show shame. From the group of Apache men, one figure stepped forward. He was tall, his face weathered by sun and wind, with dark eyes that seemed to penetrate beyond her surface appearance. Unlike the others, he wore a mixture of traditional clothing and items clearly obtained through trade. A cotton shirt beneath a decorated buckskin vest, his long hair bound with a strip of red cloth. "Standing Bear," the trading post owner acknowledged with a nod of respect. "Didn't expect to see you and your men here today." The Apache man did not respond immediately. Instead, he studied Elizabeth with an intensity that made her want to step back, though she held her ground. His gaze traveled from her face to the ring on the counter and back again. "You are a healer," Standing Bear said finally, his English accented but clear. Elizabeth blinked in surprise. I know some medicine, yes. My father was a doctor in Boston." Standing Bear nodded slowly, as if confirming something he already knew. With deliberate movements, he reached for the ring on the counter, picked it up, and extended it back toward Elizabeth. "Gold is not what we need," he said, his voice deep and measured. "It's you. Your knowledge of medicine and reading. That would truly help our people." Elizabeth stared at him, uncomprehending. How could he know about her medical knowledge, and why would he return her only means of survival? As if reading her thoughts, Standing Bear continued. "3 days ago, the Miller child fell from wagon. You helped, I saw." The memory returned to Elizabeth, a young boy with a badly gashed arm, crying as his frightened mother looked on helplessly. Elizabeth had cleaned and bandaged the wound, using skills learned at her father's side. She hadn't realized anyone else had witnessed the incident. "My people suffer from sickness brought by white man," Standing Bear continued. "Many die. We need someone who understands white man's medicine." The trading post owner shifted uncomfortably. "Standing Bear, you can't just take a white woman." "I am not taking," the Apache leader interrupted, his eyes never leaving Elizabeth's face. "I am offering food, shelter, purpose." He held the ring out further. "More valuable than gold." Elizabeth looked at the ring, then at the stern face of the man offering her a chance at survival, and felt the world tilt beneath her feet. The trading post fell silent as every eye fixed upon Elizabeth and the Apache leader. The weight of Standing Bear's words hung in the air like summer lightning, dangerous, powerful, transformative. Elizabeth's breath caught in her throat as her mind raced between fear and a desperate glimmer of hope. "You want me to go with you?" she finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "To your people." Standing Bear nodded once, the movement deliberate and solemn. "My sister's daughter burns with fever for 5 days now. The medicine man tries, but she grows weaker. Your knowledge may save her." The trading post owner, a man named Harrison Beckett according to the weathered sign outside, stepped closer. "Miss, you don't need to do this. I can extend credit for supplies, enough to get you to Prescott where there's proper civilization." Elizabeth glanced at him, noting the concern in his eyes, though whether it was for her welfare or his conscience, she couldn't determine. Her gaze returned to the gold band, still extended toward her in Standing Bear's open palm. "And how would I repay this credit, Mr. Beckett?" she asked quietly. "I have no money, no family, west of the Mississippi." A voice called from the back of the store, a settler with a face reddened by sun and whiskey. "Widow woman like you could find a husband quick enough. Plenty of men need a wife out here." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the small crowd, and Elizabeth felt her cheeks burn despite her exhaustion. The simplicity of their solution, to pass from one man's protection to another's, struck her as both practical and unbearable. She straightened her spine, summoning the dignity her mother had instilled in her through years of Boston society. "I was a nurse during the war," she said, addressing Standing Bear directly. "I assisted my father with his patients afterward. If your people are ill, perhaps I can help." A woman pushed through the onlookers, Mrs. Miller, mother of the boy Elizabeth had helped days earlier. Her face was drawn with concern. "You can't seriously be considering this," she said, clutching at Elizabeth's sleeve. "The Apache—" She lowered her voice, though not enough. "They're savages. You've heard the stories." Standing Bear's expression remained impassive, but Elizabeth saw something flicker in his dark eyes, not anger, but a profound weariness. "I have heard many stories," Elizabeth replied carefully, "about the Apache, about the cavalry, about what men do to one another in this territory. Few of them speak well of anyone." She turned back to Standing Bear. "If I come with you, will I be free to leave when I wish? When my people no longer need healing, or when you no longer wish to stay," he confirmed with another nod, "you will not be prisoner." Elizabeth took a deep breath, feeling the weight of every eye upon her. In Boston, she had been invisible, a doctor's spinster daughter, until Thomas had surprised everyone by asking for her hand. Here, in this dusty outpost on the edge of civilization, her choice was suddenly significant, important. "How far is your camp?" she asked. "Half day's ride, too far to walk." Standing Bear gestured to the horses outside. "You ride with Morning Sky." He indicated a younger Apache man who stood slightly apart from the others, his face unreadable. Beckett moved closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Miss Holloway, this is madness. Let me help you get to Prescott. These people... There's been trouble with the army, raids on both sides. You could be putting yourself in danger." Elizabeth looked at the supplies behind the counter, supplies she had no means to purchase. She thought of Prescott, a town full of strangers where she would have no position, no protection beyond the charity of strangers or the dubious security of a hasty marriage. Then she looked at Standing Bear, who waited with the patience of a man accustomed to deliberation, to weighing lives in the balance. He did not plead or pressure. He simply waited for her decision, respecting her right to make it. With steady fingers that belied her inner turmoil, Elizabeth reached for her wedding ring. Instead of taking it, however, she gently closed Standing Bear's fingers around it. "Keep it," she said softly, "as a promise between us. When our agreement is complete, you will return it to me." Something shifted in Standing Bear's expression, a glimmer of respect, perhaps even surprise. He nodded once more, tucking the ring into a small leather pouch at his waist. "We leave now," he said. "There is little daylight left." Elizabeth turned to gather her meager belongings, ignoring the murmurs that erupted around her. Mrs. Miller caught her arm again. "You're making a terrible mistake," the woman hissed. "What would your husband think?" The question struck Elizabeth like a physical blow. What would Thomas think? The young man who had dreamed of Western opportunity, who had promised her adventure and a new beginning, now lying beneath the unforgiving earth. "My husband is dead, Mrs. Miller," Elizabeth replied, her voice steady despite the grief that still sat heavy in her chest. "And I must find my own way now." Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the hardened earth. The Apache men mounted their horses with fluid grace born of lifetimes spent in the saddle. Morning Sky, younger than Standing Bear but with the same watchful intensity, brought his horse alongside a crude wooden platform that served as a mounting block. Elizabeth hesitated, her bundle clutched to her chest. The decision made inside the trading post suddenly seemed unreal in the harsh light of day. She was about to ride away with people she didn't know, whose language she couldn't speak, to a place no white woman had likely ever been invited. Standing Bear, already mounted on a magnificent roan stallion, looked down at her. "You are afraid," he observed without judgment. "Yes," Elizabeth admitted, seeing no point in denial. "Fear keeps us alive," he replied, "but it must not rule us." Simple words, yet they resonated within her. Elizabeth placed her foot on the mounting block and, with Morning Sky's reluctant assistance, settled behind him on the horse. The animal shifted beneath the unfamiliar weight, and Elizabeth gripped the edge of the saddle, suddenly aware of how little experience she had on horseback. As the small party prepared to leave, Harrison Beckett emerged from the trading post, a package wrapped in brown paper in his hands. "Here," he said gruffly, handing it up to Elizabeth. "Medicines, quinine, laudanum, some bandages. If you're determined to go playing Florence Nightingale to the Indians, might as well have proper supplies." Elizabeth accepted the package with surprise. "Thank you," she said. "I'll repay you somehow." Beckett shook his head. "Just stay alive, Miss Holloway. That'll be payment enough." With a nod to Standing Bear, the trader stepped back. The Apache leader raised his hand in a signal, and the group began to move, hooves kicking up dust as they headed away from the trading post. Elizabeth didn't look back at the small crowd watching their departure. Instead, she fixed her gaze on the horizon, where the fading sunlight painted the distant mountains in shades of purple and gold. Whatever awaited her there, death or purpose, captivity or freedom, she would face it with the same quiet strength that had carried her through the war, through her father's death, through Thomas's fever and her desperate journey west. She was Elizabeth Holloway, and she had made her choice. The sun dipped lower behind the jagged mountain peaks as the small party rode eastward. Elizabeth clung to the back of the saddle, her body aching from the unfamiliar motion. Every hoofbeat sent shocks of discomfort through her exhausted frame, yet she made no sound of complaint. The Apache men rode in silence, their postures relaxed despite the pace they maintained. The landscape transformed around them, the flat desert giving way to rocky foothills dotted with twisted juniper trees and sprawling cacti. As twilight descended, the heat of the day surrendered to a surprising chill that made Elizabeth shiver in her thin dress. Without a word, Morning Sky reached back and handed her a small woven blanket. She accepted it with murmured thanks, wrapping it around her shoulders, noting the intricate geometric patterns worked into the fabric. "You speak well for a white woman," Morning Sky said suddenly, breaking the silence. His English was more heavily accented than Standing Bear's, but clear enough. Elizabeth, startled by the unexpected comment, took a moment to respond. "My father believed in education," she said. "For both his sons and his daughter." Morning Sky nodded once. "Our women are also valued for their wisdom," he replied, "not just for making children." The statement held no malice, yet Elizabeth sensed a challenge beneath it, a testing of her assumptions, perhaps. "I am glad to hear it," she said carefully. "I have much to learn about your people." "Yes," he agreed simply. "You do." They fell back into silence as the horses navigated a narrow trail that wound up through a rocky pass. Elizabeth caught glimpses of movement in the shadows, small animals scurrying away from their approach perhaps, though a persistent feeling of being watched raised the hair on her neck. "Are we alone?" she asked quietly. Morning Sky's shoulders tensed slightly. "We are always watched," he answered, "by our ancestors in the stars, by enemies, by friends." He gestured subtly toward the ridgeline above, where Elizabeth could just make out the silhouette of a mounted figure against the darkening sky. "Our scouts make sure the way is safe." Elizabeth nodded, oddly comforted by the knowledge that they were protected, even as she wondered what dangers necessitated such vigilance. As they crested a rise, Standing Bear raised his hand, bringing the group to a halt. Below them stretched a sheltered valley, tucked between protective ridges of stone. In the gathering dusk, Elizabeth could make out the shapes of wickiups, dome-like dwellings constructed of branches and brush. Arranged in a circular pattern, cookfires dotted the encampment, sending thin spirals of smoke into the twilight air. "Nashota Chokonen," Morning Sky said, noting her interest. "Home of the bear people." "It's beautiful," Elizabeth said truthfully, struck by the harmony of the settlement with its surroundings. Unlike the harsh geometric lines of white settlements, with their rigid streets and square buildings, the Apache camp seemed to grow organically from the landscape. Standing Bear turned his horse, facing Elizabeth directly for the first time since they had left the trading post. "Our ways are not your ways," he said, his voice carrying in the still evening air. "But sickness knows no difference between Apache and white. Pain speaks one language." Elizabeth met his gaze steadily. "I understand. Good." He gestured toward the camp. "You will stay with my sister, White Shell Woman. Her daughter is the one who needs your help." With that, he urged his horse forward, leading them down into the valley. As they approached the camp, Elizabeth saw activity stir. People emerging from dwellings, children running to watch their arrival. The atmosphere tensed perceptibly as she was noticed among the returning men. A woman stepped forward as they entered the camp's central area. Tall and straight-backed despite her years, she wore a dress decorated with intricate beadwork, her silver-streaked hair bound in a complex braid. The resemblance to Standing Bear was unmistakable in the high cheekbones and penetrating gaze. Standing Bear dismounted and spoke rapidly in Apache to the woman, who listened with an impassive expression. Her eyes never left Elizabeth, assessing her with the intensity of one whose judgment would determine much. Finally, Standing Bear turned, gesturing for Elizabeth to dismount. Morning Sky slid gracefully from the horse and offered his hand to help her down. Elizabeth's legs nearly buckled as she returned to solid ground, stiff from hours in the saddle. "White Shell Woman," Standing Bear said in English. "This is the healer I spoke of." "Elizabeth." The older woman stepped forward, her gaze unwavering. "You think you can help my daughter where our medicine man cannot?" she asked, her English accented but clear. Elizabeth swallowed, acutely aware of the many eyes upon her. "I don't know," she answered honestly, "but I will try, with your permission." White Shell Woman's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "My daughter's name is Tala," she said. "It means wolf. She has the spirit of one, but even wolves can fall to fever." She turned, gesturing for Elizabeth to follow. As they walked through the camp, Elizabeth felt the weight of curious stares. Children whispered behind their hands. Women paused in their tasks to watch. Men observed with expressions ranging from open hostility to cautious curiosity. White Shell Woman's wickiup stood near the center of the camp. It was larger than many of the others, with a small fire burning in a stone-lined pit before the entrance. The woman ducked inside, and after a moment's hesitation, Elizabeth followed. The interior was dim, lit only by the fire's glow, filtering through the entrance and a small smoke hole above. As her eyes adjusted, Elizabeth made out a pallet of hides and blankets on which lay a young woman, no more than 16 or 17, Elizabeth guessed. Her face was flushed with fever, her breathing shallow and rapid. Beside her knelt an elderly man with deeply lined features, softly chanting as he waved what appeared to be a bundle of herbs over the girl's prone form. The medicine man looked up as they entered, his chanting ceasing. He and White Shell Woman exchanged words in Apache, his tone questioning, perhaps challenging. Whatever White Shell Woman's response, it seemed to settle the matter, for he rose stiffly and moved aside, though his expression communicated clear skepticism. Elizabeth knelt beside the girl, setting her bundle and Beckett's package of medicines nearby. She placed a hand on Tala's forehead, feeling the dry heat of high fever. Gently, she lifted the girl's eyelids, noting the dilated pupils. The rapid pulse beneath her fingertips confirmed what she had already suspected. This was no ordinary fever. "How long has she been like this?" Elizabeth asked, carefully examining Tala's arms and neck for any signs of injury or infection. 5 days, White Shell Woman replied, kneeling opposite Elizabeth. "It began with headache, then shaking chills. Now she burns, but does not wake." Elizabeth nodded, reaching for her father's medical journal. Has anyone else in the camp been ill with similar symptoms? 2 others. 1 recovers. 1 died yesterday. The blunt answer sent a chill through Elizabeth. Whatever this illness was, it was serious. Possibly typhoid, malaria, or one of the other fevers that had claimed so many lives during the war. "I need clean water," Elizabeth said, unwrapping Beckett's package. "And if you have willow bark, that would help reduce her fever." The medicine man, who had been watching silently, spoke to White Shell Woman. She translated, "He has already tried the bark of the willow. It does not help." "Then we'll try something stronger," Elizabeth replied, removing a small bottle from the package. "This is quinine. It's bitter, but it might help if this is a marsh fever." As she worked, mixing the quinine with water, Elizabeth became aware of a presence at the entrance to the wickiup. Standing, Bear stood there, his tall frame silhouetted against the fading light outside. His expression was unreadable as he watched Elizabeth administer the medicine to his niece, carefully lifting the girl's head to help her swallow. "Will she live?" he asked simply. Elizabeth met his gaze across the small space. "I don't know," she answered, the same honest response she had given his sister. "But I will do everything I can." Standing Bear held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded once before withdrawing. In that brief exchange, Elizabeth understood what remained unspoken. Her own fate in this camp might well be tied to whether Tala lived or died. Through the long night, Elizabeth maintained her vigil beside Tala's bed. By the flickering light of a small oil lamp provided by White Shell Woman, she bathed the girl's burning forehead with cool water, carefully measured doses of quinine, and monitored each labored breath. The medicine man, whose name she learned was Singing Crow, remained nearby, occasionally burning herbs that filled the wickiup with a sharp, cleansing scent. White Shell Woman never left her daughter's side. Her stoic presence was both a comfort and an unspoken pressure. In the quiet hours, as Tala's breathing hitched and faltered only to even out again, Elizabeth found herself speaking softly about her life before. About Boston, with its cobbled streets and brick buildings, about the war hospitals where she had learned the hard practicalities of medicine, about Thomas and their journey west. "He was kind," she said, wringing out a cloth in the water basin. "Not like some men who see a wife as property. He listened when I spoke of medicine." White Shell Woman nodded. "A good husband values his wife's wisdom," she said simply. Standing Bear's wife was such a one. "Was?" Elizabeth asked, carefully monitoring Tala's pulse. "She died 3 winters ago, the same coughing sickness that took many of our people." White Shell Woman's voice remained steady, but her eyes reflected old grief. "Our medicine could not save her." Elizabeth nodded, understanding the implicit message. Their medicine had failed before, hers might fail now. Yet there was no accusation in White Shell Woman's tone, only the weary acceptance of one who had seen much suffering. As dawn approached, Tala's fever seemed to break slightly. Her breathing became less labored, and when Elizabeth placed a few drops of water on her cracked lips, she swallowed reflexively. It was a small sign, but Elizabeth clung to it. "This is good," she said to White Shell Woman. "Her body is fighting." The older woman studied her daughter's face with cautious hope. "You have gentle hands," she observed, "like a mother's hands." Elizabeth felt an unexpected tightness in her throat. "I have no children," she said quietly. "No?" White Shell Woman seemed surprised. "Your husband did not want them." "We hoped," Elizabeth began, then stopped, the memory still raw. "There was a child, but it came too early, too small. It did not live." She busied herself adjusting Tala's blankets, avoiding White Shell Woman's eyes. "That was before we left Boston." A weathered hand reached across the space between them, covering Elizabeth's briefly. The touch was unexpected. a moment of connection transcending the vast differences between them. When morning light filtered through the smoke hole above, Singing Crow returned with a wooden bowl containing a steaming liquid. He spoke rapidly to White Shell Woman, who translated for Elizabeth. "He has made medicine tea from the root of the echinacea plant. It strengthens the body against sickness." Elizabeth nodded, recognizing the remedy. "We use this too," she said, earning a surprised look from the medicine man. "It is good medicine. It will help the quinine work better." A subtle shift occurred as her words were translated. A small recognition that perhaps their healing traditions were not as separate as they might have seemed. Outside the wickiup, the camp was coming to life. Elizabeth could hear voices, the laughter of children, the domestic sounds of a community beginning its day. When White Shell Woman went to fetch fresh water, Elizabeth followed her to the entrance, stretching her cramped muscles and breathing deeply of the morning air. The camp was a hive of activity. Women ground corn between stones, tended cooking fires, or worked on intricate beadwork. Men prepared for hunting or repaired weapons and tools. Children darted between the wickiups, engaged in games whose rules Elizabeth could not discern. The normalcy of it struck her. How different in appearance from a Boston street or a Western settlement, yet how fundamentally similar in purpose and community. Her appearance at the entrance drew attention. Conversations paused, heads turned. A young mother pulled her child closer, as if Elizabeth carried contagion. But an elderly woman nodded in greeting, and a young man offered a tentative wave. The boy whose broken arm she had set at the trading post, she realized with surprise. Standing, Bear approached, his expression grave. "How is Tala?" "A little better, I think," Elizabeth replied honestly. "The fever has lessened slightly, but she is not out of danger." He nodded, his dark eyes studying her face. "You have not slept?" "No." Elizabeth smoothed her rumpled dress, suddenly self-conscious of her disheveled appearance. "You must rest. Even the strongest horse cannot run forever." The concern in his voice caught her off guard. "I will rest when I'm certain Tala is improving." Standing Bear considered this, then motioned to a young girl who stood nearby watching with undisguised curiosity. He spoke to her in Apache, and she nodded before running off toward another wickiup. "I have asked for food to be brought," he explained. "You must eat to keep your strength." The girl soon returned with a wooden bowl containing a steaming mixture of what appeared to be cornmeal and wild berries, along with a piece of flat bread. Elizabeth accepted it gratefully, realizing how long it had been since she had eaten properly. As she ate, Standing Bear remained nearby, his presence drawing curious glances from others in the camp. Elizabeth sensed that his public association with her carried meaning, offering protection perhaps, or simply demonstrating that she was there with the blessing of leadership. "Your people are wary of me," she observed between careful bites. Standing Bear's expression remained impassive. "They have reason to be. Many have died at the hands of whites. Soldiers burn our camps, push us from our lands. Settlers poison water holes." Elizabeth lowered her bowl, appetite dimming. "Not all whites wish harm to the Apache." "No," he acknowledged, "but a rabbit does not stop to ask which coyote means it harm. It runs from all coyotes." He gestured toward the camp. "We have survived by being cautious." The conversation was interrupted by a commotion from White Shell Woman's wickiup. The medicine man, Singing Crow, emerged, calling out in Apache. Standing Bear's expression tightened, and he moved quickly toward the dwelling. Elizabeth followed, heart pounding. Inside, she found Tala thrashing weakly on her pallet, her body rigid with convulsions. White Shell Woman knelt beside her, attempting to hold her still, while speaking urgently to her daughter. "The fever has returned stronger," Elizabeth said, quickly kneeling beside the girl. She placed her hand on Tala's forehead, feeling the burning heat that had replaced the earlier hopeful coolness. We need to cool her body immediately." Standing Bear translated as Elizabeth worked, calling for fresh water and cloths. She stripped away the heavy blankets despite Singing Crow's vocal protests, which Standing Bear silenced with a sharp word. "In Boston, we would immerse her in cool water," Elizabeth explained, bathing Tala's limbs with wet cloths. "But we have no tub large enough. This will have to do." The next hour passed in tense activity. Elizabeth applied her medical knowledge with a calm efficiency that belied her inner turmoil. She administered more quinine, encouraged small sips of water between Tala's moments of consciousness, and continuously worked to lower the dangerous fever with cool compresses. Outside, a crowd had gathered. Elizabeth could sense their presence, hear their murmured conversations, though she couldn't understand the words. She knew what they must be thinking. That the white woman's medicine was failing, that Tala was slipping away despite her efforts. As the sun climbed toward noon, Tala's convulsions finally subsided. She lay utterly still, her breathing shallow but steady. Elizabeth checked her pulse, finding it rapid but stronger than before. "The crisis has passed, I think," she said softly to White Shell Woman, "but she is very weak. The next day will determine much." White Shell Woman nodded, her face lined with exhaustion and worry. "You fight hard for my daughter," she observed, "as if she were your own blood." Elizabeth wrung out another cloth, placing it gently on Tala's forehead. "All life deserves fighting for," she replied simply, "and I made a promise." Standing Bear, who had remained nearby throughout the crisis, spoke from the entrance of the Wickiup. "What promise?" Elizabeth met his gaze steadily. "To help where I can, to use what knowledge I have." She paused. "It's why I became a nurse during the war. Too many were dying, and I couldn't stand by doing nothing." Something shifted in Standing Bear's expression, a recognition, perhaps, of the conviction that drove her. Without another word, he ducked out of the dwelling, leaving Elizabeth to her patient and her thoughts. As Tala rested more peacefully, Elizabeth finally allowed herself a moment of reflection. 24 hours earlier, she had been a desperate widow, contemplating the sale of her wedding ring for food. Now, she sat in an Apache Wickiup, fighting for the life of a girl whose language she couldn't speak, surrounded by a culture she barely understood. Yet somehow, in this strange place, she had found purpose again. Whether Tala lived or died, Elizabeth had remembered what it meant to be needed, to apply her skills towards something that mattered. It was a feeling she had lost after Thomas's death, the sense that her presence in the world made a difference. Outside, the camp continued its daily rhythms. Inside, between two worlds, Elizabeth kept her vigil. 3 days passed before Tala opened her eyes fully and recognized her mother. The moment came at dawn, as Elizabeth dozed lightly beside the girl's pallet, exhaustion having finally claimed her after countless hours of vigilance. She woke to the sound of White Shell Woman's soft exclamation, a mother's joy transcending language. "Shimasani," Tala whispered, her voice cracked and weak, but unmistakably lucid. "Mother." White Shell Woman cradled her daughter's face between weathered hands, tears tracking silently down her cheeks. Elizabeth watched the reunion with her own eyes misting, the bond between mother and child, a universal language she understood perfectly. News of Tala's recovery spread through the camp like wildfire. By mid-morning, a steady stream of visitors arrived at the Wickiup, each bearing small gifts, a polished stone, dried berries, intricately woven bracelets. Elizabeth found herself the unexpected recipient of nods and tentative smiles as she moved between the dwelling and the nearby stream where she washed the cloths used during Tala's illness. On the 4th day, Standing Bear approached as Elizabeth hung the last of the linens to dry on a juniper branch. "My niece asks for you," he said without preamble. Elizabeth gathered her damp skirts, following him through the camp. She noticed subtle changes in how she was received. Children no longer darted away at her approach, women offered greeting nods, and the open hostility had largely faded from the men's faces. Inside the wickiup, Tala sat propped against rolled blankets, still weak but alert. Her dark eyes, so like her uncle's, studied Elizabeth with open curiosity. "She wishes to thank you," White Shell Woman translated as Tala spoke softly in Apache. "She says, when the fever took her mind, she walked the shadow path between worlds. But she heard your voice calling her back." Elizabeth knelt beside the pallet, touched by the girl's words. "I'm glad you heard me," she replied simply. "You are very strong to have fought so hard." As White Shell Woman translated, Tala reached out, taking Elizabeth's hand. She turned it palm up, studying the pale skin, the trimmed nails so different from her own. Then, with deliberate care, she placed a small object in Elizabeth's palm, a pendant carved from shell, hanging from a slender leather cord. White Shell Woman explained, "This is her namesake medicine. The white shell brings protection from illness. She wishes you to have it." "I can't accept something so personal," Elizabeth protested, understanding the significance of the gesture. "To refuse would dishonor her gift," Standing Bear said from the entrance. "She offers not just the shell, but her trust." Elizabeth swallowed hard, then nodded, allowing Tala to place the cord around her neck. The small pendant rested against her collarbone, cool and smooth. "Thank you," she said, the words inadequate for the emotion behind them. "I will treasure it." That evening, Elizabeth was invited to join the communal meal at the center of the camp, a clear statement that she was no longer merely a tolerated outsider. She sat between White Shell Woman and Standing Bear, acutely aware of the symbolic placement. The food was simple but nourishing, a stew of rabbit and wild vegetables, bread made from ground mesquite pods, and roasted cactus fruit for sweetness. As firelight flickered over the gathered faces, an elderly man began to speak, his voice rising and falling in the cadences of a practiced storyteller. Though Elizabeth couldn't understand the words, she felt the power of the narrative, watching as expressions around the circle shifted from attention to amusement to solemn reflection. "He tells of our creation," Standing Bear explained quietly. "How first man and first woman brought the people into being. How we learned to live in harmony with the desert and mountains." "Your stories are your history," Elizabeth observed, "just as our books are ours." Standing Bear considered this. "Yes, but your books remain the same no matter who reads them. Our stories live in the telling, changing like the seasons, yet always true at their heart." Elizabeth pondered this different concept of truth and history as the storyteller continued. Around her, the community was relaxed in a way she hadn't witnessed before. Children dozing in mothers' laps, young men teasing one another good-naturedly, elders nodding in appreciation of well-remembered tales. "This is how it was before," Standing Bear said, his voice so low only Elizabeth could hear. "Before the soldiers came, before reservations and broken treaties." The sorrow in his voice stirred something in Elizabeth, a recognition of injustice she had previously understood only in abstract terms. Here, among these people, the consequences of her own government's policies became concrete and personal. "I'm sorry," she said, the words simple but heartfelt. Standing Bear looked at her, firelight reflecting in his dark eyes. "You did not make these policies." "No, but I benefited from them without questioning. My journey west was possible because others were pushed aside." He nodded, acknowledging the truth of her words. "Few whites see this, fewer speak it." Their conversation was interrupted as the storyteller finished his tale. In the momentary silence that followed, a young woman across the fire began to sing, her voice clear and haunting in the night air. Others joined, creating harmonies that sent shivers along Elizabeth's spine. Later, as the gathering dispersed for the night, Standing Bear walked with Elizabeth toward White Shell Woman's wickiup, where a small, separate shelter had been prepared for her. "Tomorrow, if you are willing, I would show you our healing plants," he said, "those that grow in hidden places where the earth remembers older times." The invitation surprised her. "I would like that very much." He nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. "Good. There is much knowledge to exchange, if we are both willing to learn." They had reached her shelter, a simple structure but carefully made, with fresh bedding inside and a small oil lamp for light. "Standing Bear," she said as he turned to leave, "may I ask you something?" He paused, waiting. "At the trading post, you said you saw me help the Miller child, but that happened miles from here, and I didn't see any Apache nearby." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "We see much that others do not notice. It is how we survive." He gestured toward the pendant at her throat. "Rest well, Elizabeth Holloway. You are no longer a stranger among us." As she prepared for sleep, Elizabeth touched the white shell pendant, pondering how quickly life could change. 2 weeks ago, she had been a desperate widow with no future. Now she was... what? Not Apache, certainly, yet no longer fully of the white world either. She existed in a space between cultures, her identity shifting like sand in the desert wind. Tomorrow would bring new knowledge, new connections. For tonight, that was enough. Dawn painted the eastern sky in delicate strokes of pink and gold as Elizabeth emerged from her shelter. The camp was already stirring, smoke rising from cooking fires as women prepared the morning meal. Children darted between wickiups, their laughter bright in the cool morning air. Elizabeth had slept deeply for the first time since arriving, the exhaustion of Tala's illness finally claiming its due. Standing Bear waited at the edge of the camp, a leather bag slung across his shoulder and a sturdy walking stick in hand. He acknowledged her approach with a nod, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts. "Good morning," Elizabeth said, suddenly self-conscious. She had done her best to smooth her wrinkled dress and tidy her hair, which had begun to escape its pins after days of neglect. "The day speaks well," Standing Bear replied, his customary greeting. He gestured toward the eastern hills. "We go there. Many healing plants grow in the shadow of the red rocks." They set out, Elizabeth matching her stride to his purposeful pace. As they left the camp behind, she became aware of the vastness of the landscape, how small they were against the towering sky and endless horizon. The silence between them was not uncomfortable but contemplative, each lost in private thoughts. After nearly an hour of steady walking, they reached a sheltered canyon where a small spring bubbled from beneath lichen-covered rocks. The moisture created a hidden garden of plants that thrived in the protected microclimate, so different from the arid terrain surrounding it. Standing Bear knelt beside a cluster of small, white-flowered plants. "This is what your people call yarrow," he said, carefully harvesting several stems. "We call it blood medicine. It stops bleeding and fights infection." Elizabeth nodded. "Yes, we used it during the war when supplies ran low. It saved many lives." He looked up, interest flickering in his dark eyes. "You have seen much death for one so young." "Too much," she admitted, the memories of overflowing field hospitals still vivid despite the years that had passed. "But healing balances death. That's why I continued with nursing after the war ended." Standing Bear considered this as he placed the yarrow in his bag. Balance is important, life and death, sun and moon, man and woman. He moved to another plant, this one bearing small red berries. "This is manzanita. The berries treat coughs and stomach sickness." Throughout the morning, he showed her dozens of plants, explaining their uses while listening attentively to her own knowledge of herbal remedies. Elizabeth filled the pockets of her apron with samples, eager to document each one in her father's medical journal. At midday, they paused to rest in the shade of a towering cottonwood tree. Standing Bear produced a small bundle of food, dried meat, pine nuts, and flat bread, which they shared in companionable silence. The peaceful interlude gave Elizabeth courage to ask questions that had been forming in her mind. "You speak English very well," she observed. "Better than most of your people." A shadow crossed his face. "I was taken to the white man's school when I was a boy. They cut my hair, forbade our language, taught me to farm like a white man." His voice remained even, but Elizabeth sensed the old pain beneath the words. "I learned their ways, their words, their God. I was there for 3 years before I escaped." Elizabeth felt a pang of shame for her people's arrogance. "I'm sorry. It was long ago." Standing Bear's expression softened slightly. "Some knowledge was useful. I learned to read their words, to understand their thinking. This helps me protect my people now." "Is that why you approached me at the trading post?" Elizabeth asked. "Because you understood white medicine might help where your own had failed?" He nodded. "I watched you with the Miller boy. Your hands were gentle but certain. You did not fear the blood or the child's pain." He paused. "And when I saw you offer your ring, your last valuable thing, I knew you were someone who understood sacrifice." The mention of her wedding ring reminded Elizabeth of their arrangement. "Do you still have it?" she asked quietly. Standing Bear reached into a small pouch at his waist, removing the gold band. It gleamed in the dappled sunlight filtering through the cottonwood leaves. "I keep my promises," he said, offering it to her. "Tala is healed. You are free to go, if you wish." Elizabeth stared at the ring resting in his open palm, the symbol of her marriage, her past life, her connection to Boston and all it represented. She made no move to take it. "Where would I go?" she asked finally, raising her eyes to his. "I have no home, no family waiting for me. The white settlements would welcome a woman with healing skills. Perhaps." Elizabeth glanced around at the peaceful canyon, then back to Standing Bear. "But I'm learning so much here, about plants I never knew existed, about ways of healing that aren't in any medical textbook." She hesitated. "If your people will allow it, I would like to stay longer, to continue learning." Something flickered in Standing Bear's expression, surprise perhaps, or a deeper emotion she couldn't name. He closed his fingers around the ring. "My people accept you now. You saved Tala when our medicine could not." "Our medicines together saved her," Elizabeth corrected gently. "Your traditional remedies and my quinine, neither alone would have been enough." A rare smile transformed Standing Bear's face, softening the stern lines and lighting his eyes. "You understand. This is why you are different from other whites." The moment stretched between them, a connection forming that transcended their different worlds. Elizabeth felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the desert sun. Standing Bear broke the silence first, rising to his feet. "There is one more medicine place I would show you today." They continued their journey deeper into the canyon, eventually reaching a series of shallow pools fed by the spring. The water was startlingly clear, reflecting the blue sky above. "These waters have healing properties," Standing Bear explained. "The minerals strengthen bones, ease pain." He knelt, cupping the cool water in his hands and drinking deeply. "The people have come here for many generations when illness or injury troubles them." Elizabeth touched the surface of the nearest pool, watching ripples spread outward from her fingertips. "Nature provides so much that we often overlook," she observed. "In Boston, people pay fortunes for medicines that sometimes grow wild in their own gardens." "The Apache do not own the land," Standing Bear said, watching her. "We belong to it. Its gifts are for all who respect them." As they started back toward the camp, Elizabeth's thoughts turned to the people waiting there. White Shell Woman's quiet strength, Tala's resilient spirit, Singing Crow's ancient wisdom. In just over a week, they had ceased to be strangers. They had become... what? Not quite family, but something more than mere acquaintances. The sun was low on the horizon when they crested the final ridge overlooking the camp. Elizabeth paused, struck by the beauty of the scene below. The wickiups glowing amber in the late afternoon light, smoke rising in thin columns, the community gathered in its daily rhythms. "It's peaceful," she said softly. Standing Bear's expression darkened. "For now. But soldiers patrol more often. Settlers push closer each season. The reservation boundaries shrink with each new treaty." Elizabeth sensed his deep concern beneath the measured words. "What will happen to your people? Some chiefs choose to fight until the last warrior falls. Others surrender to reservation life, where children starve and elders die of broken hearts." His voice remained steady, but his hands clenched at his sides. "I seek a different path, one where we adapt but do not disappear, where we learn what is useful from the white world but keep our own ways alive." "A difficult balance," Elizabeth observed. "Yes." He looked at her directly, his gaze intense. "This is why your presence matters, Elizabeth Holloway. You bridge our worlds. You show it is possible to respect both ways of knowing." The responsibility implicit in his words both honored and humbled her. "I'm just one person," she said. "I have so little influence." "A single raindrop begins the flood," Standing Bear replied. "A single spark starts the fire." As they descended toward the camp, Elizabeth noticed a group of riders approaching from the west, Apache men returning from a hunting expedition. Their arrival caused a stir of excitement, women and children gathering to welcome them. Among the hunters was Morning Sky, who had remained distant since Elizabeth's arrival. He carried a deer across his horse, the successful hunt evident in his proud bearing. As he dismounted, his eyes found Elizabeth walking beside Standing Bear. His expression hardened momentarily before he turned away to present his kill to the waiting women. "Morning Sky does not approve of me," Elizabeth observed quietly. Standing Bear followed her gaze. "He lost his wife and child to the white man's disease. The pain is still fresh, though 2 summers have passed." "I understand his resentment," Elizabeth said, touching the shell pendant at her throat. "Loss changes us, makes us wary of further hurt." Standing Bear looked at her with an expression she couldn't decipher. "Yes, but loss can also open new paths if we have the courage to walk them." Before she could respond, they were greeted by Tala, who had ventured outside for the first time since her illness. The girl's steps were unsteady, but her eyes bright as she approached Elizabeth with a shy smile. "She asks if you found good medicine today," White Shell Woman translated, appearing at her daughter's side. Elizabeth nodded, showing the plants gathered in her apron. "Many wonderful medicines. Your uncle is a wise teacher." As White Shell Woman translated, Standing Bear watched the interaction, his stern features softening almost imperceptibly. In that moment, Elizabeth realized how completely her life had transformed. The desperation that had driven her to offer her wedding ring at the trading post had been replaced by something she hadn't expected to find in this harsh land, a sense of belonging. That night, as stars appeared in the velvet sky above the camp, Elizabeth sat outside her shelter, writing in her father's medical journal by lamplight. She carefully documented each plant Standing Bear had shown her, noting its Apache name, alongside the Latin nomenclature where she knew it. This record, she decided, would be her legacy, a bridge between 2 healing traditions that need not remain separate. The gold wedding band remained with Standing Bear, neither reclaimed nor rejected. Like Elizabeth herself, it existed in a space between worlds, its meaning evolving with each new dawn. Weeks slipped by, each day blending into the next as Elizabeth settled into the rhythm of Apache life. Her dresses, once symbols of her Boston propriety, had been replaced by a practical skirt and loose blouse made by White Shell Woman, more suited to the desert heat and daily activities. She wore her hair in a single braid now, adorned with a beaded tie gifted by Tala, who had recovered fully and appointed herself Elizabeth's shadow and unofficial translator. The morning found Elizabeth kneeling beside a young mother whose time had come to deliver her first child. Labor had begun before dawn, the woman's soft moans drawing Elizabeth from her shelter. Now, as morning light filtered through the Wikiup's entrance, Elizabeth spoke gentle encouragements while applying techniques learned in Boston's lying-in hospital. "Tell her to breathe slowly," Elizabeth instructed Tala, who had become increasingly proficient in translating medical terms between English and Apache. "The pain will pass in waves." Outside, the women of the camp went about their usual tasks, though Elizabeth noticed they stayed closer than normal, ears attuned to the sounds from within. Birth was women's business in Apache culture, as in her own, but Elizabeth's methods, with their emphasis on cleanliness and careful monitoring, had earned grudging respect even from those initially skeptical of white medicine. When the infant finally arrived, a robust boy with a powerful set of lungs, Elizabeth supervised the cutting of the cord with a knife sterilized in boiling water, a practice she had insisted upon despite initial resistance. "He is strong," Tala translated the mother's exhausted words. "She says it is because you have good medicine hands." Elizabeth smiled, washing the newborn with warm water before wrapping him in the soft rabbit skin blanket prepared for his arrival. "Tell her it is her strength, not mine. I merely helped what nature intended." As they emerged from the Wikiup, women gathered around, offering congratulations to the new mother and curious glances at Elizabeth. Among them was Morning Sky's sister, a young woman named Ren Song, who had recently begun seeking Elizabeth's advice for persistent headaches. "Another boy for the people," White Shell Woman announced, her voice carrying across the camp. "Strong and healthy." There were murmurs of approval, and Elizabeth noticed that even some of the men, normally distant from matters of childbirth, nodded with satisfaction. In a community under constant threat, each new life represented hope for the future. The day progressed with its usual activities, gathering food, preparing meals, maintaining the camp. Elizabeth had begun teaching a small group of women to read and write simple English words, using sticks to trace letters in the dirt. In exchange, they taught her Apache phrases, laughing good-naturedly at her pronunciation. It was mid-afternoon when the scouts returned, their horses lathered from hard riding. The camp fell silent as they conferred with Standing Bear and the other leaders, their expressions grave. Elizabeth, helping to grind corn with White Shell Woman, felt the sudden tension that rippled through the community. "What's happening?" she asked softly. White Shell Woman's weathered face revealed nothing. The soldiers moved closer. Many horses, many guns. Elizabeth's hands stilled on the grinding stone. "Will there be trouble?" "There is always trouble when the bluecoats come," the older woman replied simply. "They do not see us as people. They see only obstacles to be removed." Standing Bear approached, his expression carefully controlled. Elizabeth had learned to read the subtle signs of his concern, the slight tension around his eyes, the set of his jaw. He spoke briefly to White Shell Woman in Apache, then turned to Elizabeth. "We must talk," he said. "Walk with me." They moved away from the central area of the camp toward a small rise that offered a view of the surrounding valley. Standing Bear remained silent until they reached the summit, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon, where a thin column of dust marked the cavalry's movement. Captain Reynolds leads the patrol, he said finally. A man known for his hatred of Apache. 3 moons ago, his men burned a peaceful camp to the north. Women, children, it did not matter to him. Elizabeth felt a chill despite the afternoon heat. What will you do? We could fight. Standing Bear's voice was flat. We have warriors who would gladly die in battle, but I have seen what follows. The reprisals, the hunting down of survivors, the forced marches to reservations where sickness claims those the bullets missed. He turned to face her directly. Or we could move deeper into the mountains. There are places the soldiers cannot easily follow, but winter comes soon. Food would be scarce. Elizabeth understood the impossible choice he faced. Resistance that might mean destruction, or retreat that brought its own dangers. Is there no middle path? Perhaps. Standing Bear studied her face with an intensity that made her heart quicken. You once lived in their world. You understand their ways, their thinking. If you spoke to them, me? Elizabeth's surprise was evident. I have no authority among soldiers. You are a white woman. Your words would carry weight that mine cannot, no matter how many treaties I have signed or how perfect my English. The trust implicit in his request humbled her. What would you have me say? The truth, that we are peaceful, that we wish only to remain on our ancestral lands until the next planting season, when we will consider moving to the reservation at San Carlos, if they can guarantee better conditions than what we have heard from other bands. Elizabeth considered the dangerous proposal. To approach the cavalry meant risking her own safety and possibly raising questions about her presence among the Apache. Yet she understood why Standing Bear asked. Her position between worlds gave her a unique ability to translate not just language, but intentions. I will help if I can, she said finally, but I cannot promise they will listen. Standing Bear nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. I ask for nothing more. He hesitated, then added, this places you in a difficult position. Your people may not understand why you live among us. These are my people now too, Elizabeth replied, with a certainty that surprised her. Or at least you have become as much my people as those I left behind. Something flickered in Standing Bear's eyes, a warmth that had been appearing more frequently in recent days when they spoke. You have a generous heart, Elizabeth Holloway. The use of her full name, spoken with such deliberate care, sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. Before she could respond, a commotion from the camp drew their attention. Morning Sky was approaching, his expression thunderous. He disagrees, Standing Bear said quietly. He believes any parley with soldiers is weakness. Morning Sky reached them, speaking rapidly in Apache. The exchange between the men grew heated, though both maintained the controlled demeanor valued by their culture. Elizabeth caught words she recognized: fight, soldiers, betrayal, but could not follow the full conversation. Finally, Morning Sky turned to her, switching to English. You will bring them here. They will see our women, our children, our supplies. Then they will know exactly how to attack. I would never endanger your people, Elizabeth replied steadily, meeting his accusatory gaze. I have lived among you, eaten your food, learned your ways. Why would I betray that trust? Because white blood calls to white blood, Morning Sky snapped. When the moment comes, you will choose your own kind. Standing Bear's voice cut through the tension. Enough. The decision is made. Elizabeth will speak to Captain Reynolds because I have asked it of her, because she understands both worlds in a way none of us can. Morning Sky's jaw tightened, but he offered no further argument. With a last hostile glance at Elizabeth, he turned and strode back toward the camp. He fears for our people, Standing Bear said when Morning Sky was out of earshot. His anger comes from love. Elizabeth nodded, understanding the complex emotions at play. I know, and his concerns aren't without merit. This is dangerous for everyone. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the dust cloud that marked the cavalry's progress. It had changed direction, moving parallel to their position rather than directly toward the camp. A temporary reprieve, perhaps. "When would you have me go?" Elizabeth asked. "Tomorrow, with a white flag. I will send 2 warriors to accompany you part of the way, but they will remain hidden. If there is trouble..." Standing Bear did not complete the thought. Elizabeth touched the white shell pendant at her throat, drawing strength from its smooth surface. "I understand." As they walked back to the camp, Standing Bear spoke of practical matters. What message to convey, what to observe about the soldiers' numbers and equipment, how to arrange a formal parley if the captain proved receptive. Yet beneath the tactical discussion, Elizabeth sensed his concern for her safety. At the edge of the camp, he paused. "You should know that among my people, when a woman speaks for a chief to outsiders, it carries special meaning. It suggests she holds a place of importance." Elizabeth absorbed the implication of his words, her cheeks warming slightly. "And do I hold such a place?" Standing Bear's gaze was steady, unflinching. "You know that you do." The simple statement hung between them, neither elaborating on exactly what kind of importance she held. It wasn't necessary. The growing connection between them had been building day by day, in shared knowledge, in quiet conversations by evening fires, in the way his eyes sought hers across the camp. That evening, as the community gathered for the night meal, Elizabeth was acutely aware of the undercurrents flowing through the camp. Some, like White Shell Woman and Tala, treated her with the same warmth as always. Others, influenced by Morning Sky's concerns, watched her with renewed suspicion. She represented both hope and danger, a potential bridge between worlds and a possible betrayal of trust. As darkness fell, Elizabeth sat outside her shelter, writing in her journal by lamplight. She documented the day's events, including the birth of the healthy boy and the concerning news of approaching cavalry. Her medical notes were interspersed with increasingly personal reflections, her changing identity, her deepening connection to the Apache people, and her complicated feelings for their leader. A shadow fell across the page. Elizabeth looked up to find White Shell Woman standing nearby, a small bundle in her hands. "For tomorrow," the older woman said, offering the package. "When you speak to the soldiers." Elizabeth unwrapped the bundle to find her original dress, the one she had arrived in, cleaned and mended with nearly invisible stitches. "You must look like them again," White Shell Woman explained. "Remind them you are of their world." The practical wisdom behind the gesture touched Elizabeth deeply. "Thank you," she said, running her fingers over the familiar fabric, "for this and for so much more." White Shell Woman nodded, understanding the broader gratitude. "You walk between worlds now. It is not an easy path, but perhaps it is the one the Creator meant for you." As the older woman departed, Elizabeth held the dress against herself, feeling the strange distance between the woman who had first worn it and the person she had become. Tomorrow she would don it again, stepping back into her former identity like an actress taking up a role. But it would be just that. A role, a necessary disguise. Her true self, she was beginning to understand, existed in the space between cultures, belonging fully to neither yet, drawing strength from both. In the darkness of her shelter, Elizabeth finally allowed herself to name the emotion that had been growing within her, not just respect or friendship, but something deeper, more complex. Standing Bear had become more than a leader to her, more than a cultural guide. And tomorrow, she would risk everything to protect his people, who had somehow, improbably, become her own. Dawn broke with the muted colors of approaching autumn, the air crisp with the promise of change. Elizabeth stood in her shelter, hands trembling slightly as she buttoned the high collar of her Boston dress. The fabric felt strangely confining after weeks in the looser Apache clothing, the bodice tight across her chest, the sleeves restrictive. She had lost weight during her time in the camp, her face thinner, more weathered from the desert sun. Tala watched from the entrance, her dark eyes solemn. "You look like them again," she said, in the careful English Elizabeth had been teaching her. "Only on the outside," Elizabeth replied, reaching for her father's medical journal. She hesitated, then tucked it inside her dress pocket alongside a small leather pouch containing dried medicinal herbs, a tangible reminder of her dual allegiance. White Shell Woman entered, carrying a small pot of ochre-colored pigment. "For your skin," she explained, demonstrating how Elizabeth should apply it to her sunburned cheeks. "The soldiers expect a white woman to look like one." Elizabeth accepted the improvised cosmetic, a lump forming in her throat at the older woman's practicality. She had spent weeks learning Apache ways. Now she was being helped to reclaim the appearance of her former self. The irony wasn't lost on her. Outside, the camp moved with quiet purpose. Women packed essential belongings, prepared food for quick transport. Men checked weapons discreetly, their movements casual but their intent clear. If Elizabeth's mission failed, the camp would need to relocate swiftly. Standing Bear waited at the edge of the clearing, holding the reins of a dappled mare, the gentlest of their horses, chosen for Elizabeth's still limited riding skills. He wore his most formal attire, a beaded vest over a clean white shirt obtained through trade, his hair freshly braided with a single eagle feather, denoting his leadership. "You remember what to say?" he asked as she approached. Elizabeth nodded. "That your people wish to remain on ancestral lands until spring planting. That you've maintained peace with settlers and pose no threat to travelers. That you'll consider the San Carlos reservation if conditions improve. And if they demand immediate surrender? I'll request a formal parley," she replied, "with you and the other leaders present, under a flag of truce." Standing Bear studied her face, searching for any sign of doubt. Whatever he saw there seemed to satisfy him. "The scouts report they've established camp 6 miles southwest, near Cottonwood Creek. 2 warriors will accompany you part way." From the gathering crowd, Morning Sky stepped forward. "I will go with her." Elizabeth couldn't hide her surprise. Of all the men in camp, Morning Sky had shown the most consistent distrust of her presence. Standing Bear's expression revealed nothing. "You volunteered for this duty." "Someone must ensure she delivers our message correctly," Morning Sky replied, his tone neutral but his meaning clear. He still doubted her loyalty. "And Swift Hawk," Standing Bear continued, gesturing to a younger man who stood nearby. "Both of you will remain hidden when she approaches the soldiers, if there is trouble." "There will be no trouble," Elizabeth said with more confidence than she felt. "Captain Reynolds may be hostile to Apache, but he won't harm a white woman." "Do not be certain," White Shell Woman cautioned, adjusting the white shell pendant at Elizabeth's throat. She had insisted Elizabeth continue wearing it, concealed beneath her high collar. "Some men see only what they wish to see." Final preparations were made quickly. Elizabeth mounted the mare with Morning Sky's reluctant assistance, settling awkwardly in the saddle. She had improved as a rider under Tala's patient instruction, but still lacked the fluid confidence of those born to horseback. As they prepared to depart, Standing Bear approached, placing his hand briefly on the horse's neck just below Elizabeth's knee. The touch, though slight, conveyed volumes. "Return safely," he said simply. "I will," she promised, the words both commitment and prayer. The small party moved out, Elizabeth riding between Morning Sky and Swift Hawk. They maintained silence as they traversed the winding canyon paths, emerging onto more open terrain as the sun climbed higher. Elizabeth rehearsed her message mentally, aware of the delicate diplomatic balance required. She would need to appear both respectable enough to command the soldiers' attention and sympathetic enough to the Apache to advocate effectively. After nearly 2 hours of riding, Morning Sky raised his hand, signaling a halt. "Soldiers ahead," he said quietly. "We go no further." From their position on a scrub-covered rise, Elizabeth could see the cavalry encampment, perhaps 30 men, their blue uniforms distinct against the desert landscape. White canvas tents formed neat rows, horses picketed nearby, the American flag fluttering from a temporary standard. Morning Sky handed her a slender branch stripped of leaves, a white cloth tied to its end. "Wave this as you approach. Do not stop waving until they acknowledge you." Elizabeth accepted the makeshift flag of truce, her mouth suddenly dry. "How will I find you afterward?" "We will find you," Swifthawk assured her. "Ride directly east from their camp. Go slowly. We will watch." Morning Sky's expression remained guarded. "Remember who you speak for today," he said. "Not just yourself, not just Standing Bear, all the people." Elizabeth nodded, touched by the unexpected reminder. Despite his suspicion, Morning Sky was acknowledging her role as more than just a messenger. "I won't forget," she promised, gathering the reins in her free hand. With a deep breath, she urged the mare forward, emerging from the cover of the scrub onto open ground, the white flag held high. Her approach was spotted almost immediately. Men moved quickly through the camp, a sentry calling out, rifles raised cautiously. Elizabeth continued forward at a steady pace, maintaining a clear view of her feminine dress and the flag of truce. "Halt!" came the command when she was approximately 50 yards from the perimeter. "Identify yourself." "Elizabeth Holloway," she called back, her voice carrying in the still desert air. "I've come to speak with Captain Reynolds." There was a moment of confusion, soldiers conferring with one another. A white woman alone approaching a military camp was clearly unexpected. Finally, a sergeant gestured her forward, and Elizabeth guided her horse into the camp, acutely aware of the curious stares from all sides. Captain Reynolds emerged from the largest tent, a tall man with a weathered face and cold blue eyes beneath his regulation hat. His posture was rigid, his expression revealing nothing as he assessed the unexpected visitor. "Miss Holloway, was it?" he said, approaching her horse. "May I inquire what brings a lady such as yourself to this god-forsaken stretch of territory? And alone, no less." Elizabeth dismounted carefully, smoothing her skirts with practiced composure. "Not entirely alone, Captain. I've been living among Standing Bear's people for the past month." A ripple of murmurs passed through the gathered soldiers. Reynolds's eyes narrowed, his hand moving instinctively closer to his sidearm. "Are you saying you're a captive of the Apache?" he demanded. "Has harm come to you? We can arrange an immediate rescue operation." "No, Captain," Elizabeth interrupted firmly. "I am there by choice. I'm a trained nurse. I've been helping with medical needs in their camp." Reynolds studied her with open skepticism. "A white woman voluntarily living with savages. Forgive me if I find that difficult to believe, Miss Holloway." Elizabeth straightened her spine, channeling the dignity her Boston upbringing had instilled. "Standing Bear's people saved my life when I was destitute after my husband's death. I repaid that debt by treating illness in their camp. Now I come as their representative to discuss the situation between your forces and their community." The captain's expression hardened. "There is no situation to discuss. My orders are clear. All Apache bands in this territory are to relocate to the San Carlos Reservation immediately. Those who refuse will be considered hostile." "Standing Bear is not hostile," Elizabeth countered. "His people have maintained peace with settlers. They simply ask for time, until the spring planting, before considering relocation." "Considering?" Reynolds repeated with a harsh laugh. "They don't get to consider federal orders, Miss Holloway. They obey them." Elizabeth took a calculated risk. "Captain, I've spent time at San Carlos. The conditions are deplorable. Inadequate food, contaminated water, rampant disease. Forcing people there now at the onset of winter would be a death sentence for many. And how exactly would a Boston nurse know conditions at San Carlos? Reynolds challenged. My husband and I passed through on our journey west, Elizabeth improvised. I treated children there. The situation was inhumane. A younger officer stepped forward. Captain, perhaps we should hear her out. If there's a peaceful solution. Reynolds silenced him with a glare, then turned back to Elizabeth. You're either deluded or complicit, Miss Holloway. These Apache have clearly turned your head with their primitive mysticism. I'm offering you safe passage back to civilization, Tucson perhaps, or Fort Bowie, but my orders regarding the hostiles remain unchanged. Elizabeth felt a flutter of panic. She needed to buy time, to find some leverage. Standing Bear proposes a formal parley, she said, under a flag of truce. Surely military protocol allows for diplomatic discussion before resorting to force. The mention of protocol struck home. Several officers exchanged glances, and Elizabeth detected uncertainty in their expressions. Military men valued their procedures, their rules of engagement. Reynolds considered her words, clearly weighing options. A parley, he repeated slowly. And what guarantee do we have that this isn't a trap? Apache aren't known for honoring white man's conventions. Standing Bear gave me his word, Elizabeth said simply, and I give you mine. The word of a woman who has clearly gone native, Reynolds scoffed, but without his earlier vehemence. He seemed to be considering the proposal. A soldier approached, whispering something in the captain's ear. Reynolds' expression shifted subtly, calculation replacing outright dismissal. Very well, Miss Holloway, he said finally. A parley. Tomorrow at midday on neutral ground, the flat area near Cottonwood Creek. Standing Bear and no more than 5 warriors may attend, unarmed. I will bring an equivalent contingent. Elizabeth nodded, relief washing through her. Thank you, Captain. Don't thank me yet, Reynolds replied coldly. I'm offering a chance for them to surrender with dignity, nothing more. I understand, Elizabeth said. I'll convey your terms. Reynolds stepped closer, lowering his voice. One more thing, Miss Holloway. If you're playing some game, if Apache warriors are waiting to ambush my men, understand that I will hold you personally responsible. Petticoats won't protect you from the consequences of treason. Elizabeth met his gaze steadily. There will be no ambush, Captain. Standing Bear is a man of honor. We'll see about that. Reynolds stepped back. Lieutenant Davis, escort Miss Holloway to the perimeter. She's free to return to her friends. As Elizabeth remounted her horse, a young soldier approached, offering a small package. Mom, some hardtack and jerky. Figured you might need it. The simple kindness amid such tension brought unexpected tears to Elizabeth's eyes. Thank you, Private, she said softly, tucking the package into her saddlebag. Lieutenant Davis, a younger man with less hardened features than his captain, rode with her to the eastern edge of the camp. Miss Holloway, he said hesitantly as they reached the perimeter, is it true what they say about Apache? That they torture their captives? Elizabeth studied the lieutenant's face, recognizing genuine curiosity beneath the question. I've seen no torture, Lieutenant. Only people trying to preserve their way of life in the face of impossible odds. Davis nodded thoughtfully. Safe journey, ma'am. Elizabeth rode eastward as instructed, maintaining a steady pace until the camp disappeared behind her. The vastness of the desert stretched in all directions, and for a brief, terrifying moment, she felt utterly alone, separated from both the world she had left behind and the one she had tentatively joined. Then, morning sky materialized beside her so suddenly that she startled, the mare snorting in surprise. You spoke with them, he said. Not a question, but an observation. Elizabeth nodded. Captain Reynolds agrees to a parley. Tomorrow at midday near Cottonwood Creek, Standing Bear and 5 warriors unarmed. Swift Hawk appeared on her other side, having approached with the same ghost-like silence. "And if it is a trap?" "It's not," Elizabeth replied, with more conviction than she felt. "Reynolds is a hard man, but he'll follow military protocol. A parley is sacred, even to him." Morning Sky's expression remained doubtful, but he said nothing more as they guided her back toward the Apache camp by a different route than they had come, more circuitous, harder to track. The sun was beginning its westward descent when they arrived. The camp erupted in activity as they rode in, people gathering to hear the outcome of Elizabeth's mission. Standing Bear stepped forward, his relief at her safe return visible only in the slight relaxation of his shoulders. "You are well?" he asked quietly as she dismounted. "Yes," Elizabeth assured him. "Reynolds agreed to meet tomorrow at midday." Standing Bear nodded, turning to address the gathered community. He spoke in Apache, explaining the arrangement, outlining preparations. Elizabeth watched the reactions, hope on some faces, skepticism on others, resignation on a few. Later, as evening approached, Elizabeth sat with Standing Bear, White Shell Woman, and the other leaders around a small fire, recounting every detail of her conversation with Reynolds, his manner, his words, the reactions of his men. "He believes you will come to surrender," she concluded. "That's why he agreed to meet." Standing Bear considered this. "And what do you believe, Elizabeth? Is this man capable of hearing our words, of understanding our needs?" Elizabeth sighed, the weight of responsibility heavy on her shoulders. "He's a military man, bound by orders, but he's also concerned with appearances, with doing things properly. If we can appeal to that sense of protocol." "You trust him?" Morning Sky asked bluntly. Elizabeth chose her words carefully. "I trust that he won't violate a formal parley. Beyond that," she shook her head, "he sees Apache as problems to be solved, not people to be understood." White Shell Woman, who had been listening silently, spoke up. "You must go with them tomorrow," she said to Elizabeth. "Your presence may remind this captain that we are human beings." Standing Bear nodded agreement. "You bridge our worlds. Without you, he may not hear our words." The request settled on Elizabeth like a mantle, weighty, significant. "I'll do whatever helps," she promised. "But tomorrow, I'll wear Apache clothing. I won't pretend to be something I'm not anymore." That night, as the camp settled into an uneasy quiet, Elizabeth sat outside her shelter, gazing at the star-filled sky. The immensity of the heavens provided perspective on the human dramas playing out beneath them. Apache and white, soldier and civilian, man and woman, all tiny specks in the cosmic order. A shadow fell across the ground beside her. Standing Bear lowered himself to sit nearby, his profile strong in the moonlight. "You should rest," he said. "Tomorrow will be difficult." "My mind is too full for sleep," Elizabeth admitted. "I keep thinking about what's at stake." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the night sounds of the desert enveloping them. "I have something for you," Standing Bear said finally. He reached into the small pouch at his waist, withdrawing Elizabeth's gold wedding band. "Tomorrow, you may need this to remind the soldiers who you were." Elizabeth looked at the ring gleaming in his palm, the symbol of her former life, her connection to Boston, to Thomas, to everything that had once defined her. But now it seemed like an artifact from another lifetime, belonging to a woman she barely recognized. "No," she said softly. "I don't need it anymore." She reached out, closing his fingers around the ring. "Keep it. A promise between us, remember." Standing Bear's eyes met hers, the depth of emotion in them taking her breath away. "What promise do you offer now, Elizabeth Holloway?" "That whatever happens tomorrow," she replied, her voice steady despite the racing of her heart, "my place is here, with your people." She hesitated, then added more softly, "with you." In the silver moonlight, Standing Bear reached out, his fingers barely touching her cheek in a gesture more intimate than any embrace. "Then we face tomorrow together," he said, "between two worlds." Elizabeth leaned slightly into his touch, the simple contact communicating what words could not yet express. Tomorrow would bring danger, diplomacy, the clash of worlds. But tonight, in this moment of connection under the vast desert sky, she found the certainty she had been seeking since Thomas's death. Not just purpose, but belonging. Not just respect, but love. The morning of the parley dawned clear and still, the desert landscape painted in shades of amber and gold beneath an impossibly blue sky. The Apache camp stirred with purpose, women preparing food for a potential journey, men conferring in low voices about contingency plans should the meeting go poorly. Elizabeth moved among them, her presence a bridge between hope and caution. She had chosen her appearance with deliberate care, her hair braided in the Apache style but covered with a simple cloth. Her dress a practical combination of settler and native elements. Around her neck, visible to all, hung the white shell pendant Tala had given her. It was no longer just a gift, but a declaration. Standing Bear had selected his companions with equal thought. Not the youngest or most aggressive warriors, but men of mature judgment and experience. Morning Sky, despite his persistent suspicion of whites, was included for his knowledge of English and his tactical mind. Swifthawk, with his exceptional eyesight and tracking abilities, would serve as lookout. Two respected elders completed the group, their presence lending wisdom and historical perspective to the proceedings. As the small party prepared to depart, Tala approached Elizabeth, pressing something into her hand, a small pouch of soft leather containing dried herbs. "For protection," the girl explained in careful English, "medicine to clear the mind and see truth." Elizabeth tucked the pouch into her pocket, touched by the gesture. "Thank you," she said, embracing Tala briefly. "Keep watch over your mother while we're gone." White Shell Woman stood nearby, her face composed but her eyes revealing concern. "Remember," she told Elizabeth quietly, "soldiers understand strength, not weakness. Stand tall when you speak." The advice, practical and maternal, brought a lump to Elizabeth's throat. "I will," she promised. Standing Bear approached, leading horses for their journey. He wore his finest clothing, not to impress the white soldiers, Elizabeth knew, but to honor the seriousness of the occasion. His long hair was bound with a red cloth, his bearing regal despite the absence of the weapons he would normally carry. "It is time," he said simply. They set out in single file, Elizabeth riding between Standing Bear and Morning Sky, the terrain gradually sloping toward the agreed meeting place. Few words were exchanged, each person absorbed in private thoughts and preparations. As they neared Cottonwood Creek, Swifthawk rode ahead to scout. He returned shortly with news that made everyone tense. "The blue coats are already there," he reported. "More than 6 men, perhaps 12, and they carry weapons." Morning Sky's expression darkened. "A trap," he said flatly, "just as I warned." Standing Bear remained calm. "Did you see Captain Reynolds himself?" Swifthawk nodded. "Yes, he waits under a white flag." "Then we continue," Standing Bear decided after a moment's thought. "Reynolds may have brought extra men as precaution, just as we have scouts watching from the ridges." Elizabeth understood his reasoning. To turn back now would appear as weakness or bad faith, potentially destroying any chance for negotiated peace. Yet the news of armed soldiers waiting for them sent a chill down her spine. "I'll ride ahead," she offered. "Speak to Reynolds about the terms we agreed upon." Standing Bear considered this, then nodded. "Go. We will follow at a distance." Elizabeth urged her horse forward, emerging from the sheltering brush onto the open ground surrounding Cottonwood Creek. The cavalry contingent was immediately visible, a cluster of blue uniforms and the starred banner of the United States fluttering beside a white flag of truce. As she approached, Captain Reynolds stepped forward, flanked by Lieutenant Davis and several armed soldiers. His expression revealed surprise at her appearance, her clothing neither fully white nor fully Apache, her demeanor confident despite being alone. "Miss Holloway," he called as she reined her horse to a stop, "I was beginning to think you wouldn't show." "We agreed to meet at midday, Captain," Elizabeth replied calmly. "The sun has barely reached its zenith." Reynolds glanced past her, scanning the surrounding terrain. "And where is your Apache friend? Sending a woman to test for an ambush seems rather cowardly." Elizabeth straightened in her saddle. "We agreed to 6 men from each side, unarmed, yet I count 12 soldiers, all carrying rifles. Standing Bear observes the terms of the parley. Will you do the same?" Thus, a flicker of discomfort crossed Reynolds's face. "These are dangerous savages, Miss Holloway. Surely you understand the need for precautions." "What I understand, Captain, is that peace requires trust from both sides." She gestured toward the soldiers. "Your current posture suggests you've already decided the outcome of this meeting." Lieutenant Davis shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, the lady has a point. We did agree to equal numbers." Reynolds shot his subordinate an irritated glance, then signaled to several soldiers. "Fall back to the perimeter, keep watch, but maintain distance." 6 men retreated as ordered, though Elizabeth noted they remained within rifle range. Still, it was a concession. "The weapons, Captain?" she pressed. "My men will retain their sidearms," Reynolds stated firmly. "But rifles will be grounded during the parley. That's my final offer." Elizabeth knew it was the best compromise she would get. "I'll inform Standing Bear. We'll return momentarily." She rode back to where the Apache party waited, relaying Reynolds' terms. Morning Sky scoffed at the captain's insistence on keeping pistols, but Standing Bear raised a hand, silencing objections. "We will proceed," he decided. "Elizabeth will walk beside me. The rest of you maintain distance between each other. If there is trouble, do not seek revenge. Return to the people and lead them to the high canyon." The solemnity of his instructions hung in the air. Standing Bear was preparing for the possibility of his own death, ensuring the survival of the tribe would take precedence over vengeance. As they approached the meeting ground together, Elizabeth felt the weight of history pressing upon her shoulders. These moments, seemingly small negotiations on a remote patch of desert, would determine the fate of families, the preservation of a way of life, perhaps even the future of 2 people's relationship to this land. Captain Reynolds waited at the center of the clearing, his hand resting casually near his holstered pistol. His men stood in a loose semicircle behind him, their posture alert, despite the appearance of relaxation. "Captain Reynolds," Elizabeth said formally, "may I present Standing Bear, chief of the Bear people of the Nashota Chokonen Apache." Reynolds' gaze assessed Standing Bear with the calculating eye of a military man evaluating an opponent. For his part, Standing Bear returned the look with equal measure, his dignity undiminished by his unarmed state. "I speak English," Standing Bear said, surprising Reynolds slightly. "There is no need to talk through others." Reynolds nodded curtly. "Very well. My orders are clear, Chief Standing Bear. All Apache bands are to report to the San Carlos Reservation immediately. Those who comply will receive government protection and provisions. Those who resist will be considered hostile. My people have lived on these lands since before your grandfather's grandfather was born," Standing Bear replied evenly. "We have not attacked settlements or wagon trains. We have traded peacefully. Why must we leave now, with winter approaching?" "Orders from Washington," Reynolds said, as if that explained everything. "The territory is being opened for settlement and mining. Progress can't be held back because some prefer the old ways." Elizabeth watched Standing Bear absorb this. the casual dismissal of his people's entire existence as merely the old ways. "We ask only for time," Standing Bear continued, "until the spring planting. Then we will consider the reservation if you can guarantee better conditions than what we have heard." Reynolds shook his head. "There are no guarantees, and there is no time. Washington wants this matter resolved before winter. You have 1 week to bring your people in. After that, my orders are to compel compliance by any means necessary." The threat hung in the air, unmistakable despite its diplomatic phrasing. Elizabeth stepped forward. "Captain, surely the government doesn't intend to force women and children to march through winter conditions. The mortality rates would be unconscionable." "The government provides wagons," Reynolds countered. "Not enough for all," Morning Sky interjected, speaking for the first time. "And the food at San Carlos is rotten. The water makes children sick. We have seen those who returned." Reynolds' expression hardened. "Every transition has difficulties. The reservations are being improved." "No," Standing Bear interrupted, his voice calm but firm. "They are not. You know this as I do, Captain. San Carlos is where our people go to die slowly instead of quickly by the gun." A tense silence fell over the gathering. Lieutenant Davis cleared his throat nervously. "Perhaps a compromise, sir?" he suggested to Reynolds. "Allow them until after the worst winter months? With proper supervision, of course." Reynolds shot his subordinate an irritated look, but seemed to be considering the suggestion. Elizabeth sensed a potential opening. "Captain, what if Standing Bear's people moved to the Eastern Valley? It's closer to Fort Bowie, where they could be monitored, but would allow them time to prepare properly for the longer journey to San Carlos in early spring." The older Apache man beside Standing Bear spoke in their native tongue. Standing Bear translated for Reynolds. "Yellow Knife says his father remembered when white men and Apache first made peace. They smoked together and agreed that both could live on the land if both respected it. Has this been forgotten?" Reynolds shifted uncomfortably. "Those were different times. There are more settlers now, more demands for land and resources. And fewer Apache," Morning Sky added bitterly. "Convenient for you." The comment sparked tension. Reynolds' hand moved closer to his pistol, and his men straightened, alert to the change in atmosphere. Standing Bear raised his hand slightly, a calming gesture to his own people. "We wish peace," he stated clearly, "but peace built on respect, not submission. My people cannot survive at San Carlos now. This is truth, not negotiation." Reynolds studied him, seeming to wrestle with conflicting imperatives, military orders against practical realities, policy versus humanity. Before he could respond, commotion erupted at the perimeter. A cavalry scout rode in at speed, dismounting hastily and rushing to Reynolds. The captain stepped away, conferring urgently with the messenger while keeping a wary eye on the Apache delegation. Elizabeth exchanged a concerned glance with Standing Bear. The interruption boded ill for their delicate negotiations. Reynolds returned, his expression now cold and accusatory. "A patrol has been attacked 10 miles south of here. 3 soldiers dead, supplies stolen, Apache raiders according to the survivor." Morning Sky stiffened. "Not our people." "Apache are Apache," Reynolds snapped. "This proves you can't be trusted to keep peace even during parley." Standing Bear remained calm, though Elizabeth could sense his tension. "There are other bands, not under my authority, just as not all white men answer to you." "Convenient excuse," Reynolds retorted. "No, this ends the discussion. You have 3 days, not a week, to surrender your entire band at Fort Bowie. Any Apache found outside the reservation after that will be treated as hostile." "Captain, be reasonable," Elizabeth implored. "Standing Bear's people had nothing to do with that attack. They've been in their camp, preparing for this meeting." "And how would you know that, Miss Holloway?" Reynolds demanded. "Were you counting heads? Or are you simply repeating what you've been told to say? The accusation stung, but Elizabeth held her ground. I know these people. They value honor, especially Standing Bear. If he agreed to peace talks, he wouldn't sabotage them with raids. Your judgment is compromised, Reynolds dismissed. Stockholm Syndrome, the doctors call it. Captives beginning to sympathize with their captors. I am not a captive. Elizabeth's voice rose despite her efforts at control. I stay with them by choice. I've seen both worlds, Captain, and I can tell you which one has shown more humanity to me. Reynolds regarded her with something between pity and contempt. Then you've made your choice, Miss Holloway, but it won't change the outcome for your friends. He turned to Standing Bear. 3 days, Fort Bowie, or we come for you. With that, he signaled his men to withdraw. The parley was over. The brief window for diplomacy slammed shut by violence that had nothing to do with those present. As the cavalry mounted and began to ride away, Lieutenant Davis lingered briefly. Miss Holloway, he said quietly, the captain isn't a cruel man, but orders are orders. If there's anything I can do to ease the transition for the women and children. Elizabeth nodded, appreciating the small gesture of humanity. Thank you, Lieutenant. I'll remember that. When the soldiers had disappeared into the distance, Standing Bear turned to his companions. We must return quickly. Preparations must begin. For surrender? Morning Sky asked incredulously. For survival, Standing Bear corrected. The High Canyon offers shelter and defense. We can hold there through winter if necessary. Elizabeth realized what he was considering. Not surrender, not futile armed resistance, but strategic withdrawal to terrain the cavalry would struggle to access. As they rode back toward the camp, the tension of the failed parley hung heavy in the air. Elizabeth rode beside Standing Bear, their horses moving in synchronized rhythm. I failed, she said quietly. She said, I couldn't make Reynolds understand. Standing Bear glanced at her, his expression softened from the stoic mask he had maintained during the parley. No one could have changed his mind. The attack gave him the excuse he wanted. What will happen now? We go to the High Canyon, he replied simply. We take what we need, leave before the soldiers come. Elizabeth nodded, understanding all that remained unspoken. The journey would be difficult, especially for the elderly and the children. Life in the remote canyon during winter would demand endurance and sacrifice, but it offered the chance to preserve not just lives, but dignity and culture. I'm coming with you, she said, not a question, but a declaration. Standing Bear studied her face, his eyes searching. The way will be hard. The soldiers will consider you a traitor if they find you with us. I know. He nodded once, accepting her decision without further challenge. Then we face it together. When they reached the camp, the news spread quickly. White Shell Woman had already begun organizing the women, prioritizing what must be taken and what must be left behind. Tala worked alongside her mother, her young face solemn but determined. As Elizabeth dismounted, Morning Sky approached her, not with his usual suspicion, but with a new, reluctant respect. You spoke well, he acknowledged grudgingly, even if the blue coat would not listen. Thank you, Elizabeth replied, surprised by the concession. I only wish it had made a difference. Morning Sky shook his head. It made difference to us. You chose sides, publicly. Now we all know where you stand. His words, simple but profound, affected Elizabeth deeply. In that moment, standing between two worlds, she had indeed declared her allegiance, not just to herself or to Standing Bear, but to all who witnessed the exchange. As the camp erupted into the controlled chaos of hasty packing, Elizabeth found herself pulled into White Shell Woman's organized efforts. Together, they prepared medicinal supplies, determined what equipment was essential for treating illness or injury in their remote refuge. The High Canyon has healing waters, Whiteshell Woman explained as they worked. But the winter will be cold. Many plants sleep beneath the snow. Elizabeth nodded, mentally cataloguing the supplies they would need, calculating how long certain medicines would last. Her mind, trained in Boston's meticulous medical tradition, adapted now to wilderness survival. By evening, much of the camp had been dismantled, essential items bundled for transport. The plan, Elizabeth learned, was to depart before dawn, using darkness to cover their initial retreat. Scouts had already gone ahead to ensure the path was clear and to leave false trails for any pursuing cavalry. As twilight descended, Standing Bear called the community together one last time in this place that had been their home. He spoke in Apache, his words carrying both gravity and hope. Though Elizabeth couldn't understand everything, she recognized the cadence of reassurance, the tone of a leader strengthening his people for difficult days ahead. When he finished, an elderly woman began to sing, a haunting melody that others soon joined. Elizabeth stood among them, not apart but embraced within the circle, the white shell pendant at her throat gleaming in the firelight. Later, as the camp settled into uneasy rest before the early departure, Standing Bear sought her out. They walked together to the edge of the clearing, where the desert stretched vast and silent under a canopy of brilliant stars. "You should know what waits for us," he said quietly. "The high canyon offers protection, but it is remote. If sickness comes, there will be no help from outside. If food grows scarce, we cannot trade." "I understand," Elizabeth replied. "I've made my choice." Standing Bear turned to face her directly, his expression more open than she had ever seen it. "When I found you at the trading post, I saw only what you could offer my people, a healer, a bridge to white knowledge." He paused. "I did not expect to find what I had stopped believing existed." "And what is that?" Elizabeth asked softly, her heart quickening. "A path forward that is neither surrender nor endless war, a way of being that takes the best of both worlds." His hand moved tentatively to her face, fingers gentle against her cheek. "You have become more than I dared hope, Elizabeth Holloway." The tenderness in his touch, in his voice, conveyed what formality prevented him from saying directly. In Apache culture, Elizabeth had learned, emotions were expressed with restraint, particularly by leaders who carried the responsibility of their people's welfare. She placed her hand over his, holding it against her face. "As have you, Standing Bear." In that quiet moment under the desert stars, with the community preparing for flight in an uncertain future, Elizabeth found a certainty she had never known before. Not in Boston's structured society, not in her marriage to Thomas, not in anything that had come before. Here, between worlds, she had found her place. "Whatever comes," she said, "we face it together." Standing Bear nodded, the simple gesture sealing a pact more profound than any formal vow. Tomorrow would bring danger, hardship, the bitter struggle for survival. But tonight, in this moment, there was only this connection, a bridge between cultures, between hearts, between possible futures. As they walked back toward the camp, Elizabeth thought of her wedding ring, still in Standing Bear's keeping. The gold band that had once defined her now seemed like an artifact from another life. Her hands had found new purpose, her heart a new home, her spirit a freedom she had never imagined possible. Winter descended on the high canyon with bitter winds and occasional snow that dusted the higher elevations like powdered sugar on Boston pastries. 3 months had passed since the hasty departure from the old camp, 3 months of adaptation, endurance, and unexpected grace. The community had established itself in a sheltered basin nestled between towering canyon walls, protected from the worst of the winter storms and hidden from casual observation. Natural caves augmented by carefully constructed wickiups provided shelter. The nearby hot springs that Standing Bear had once shown Elizabeth now served as both bathing place and source of healing for aching joints and winter ailments. Elizabeth stood at the entrance of the cave that served as her healing space, watching children play in the thin morning sunlight. Despite the hardships, they had adapted with the resilience of youth, turning the restricted winter quarters into an adventure rather than an imprisonment. Her own transformation continued to unfold daily. Her hands, once soft and pale, were now strong and weathered, capable of setting bones, mixing medicines, and weaving baskets with growing skill. Her medical journal had expanded to include detailed illustrations of native plants, their Apache names carefully recorded alongside Latin terminology, creating a bridge between healing traditions. Thinking deep thoughts, Boston woman. White Shell Woman's voice carried a hint of teasing as she approached, arms full of dried herbs. Elizabeth smiled at the nickname that had once marked her as an outsider but now carried affection. Remembering, she admitted, it was nearly winter when I first came to you. And now winter again, White Shell Woman observed, entering the cave to arrange the herbs on a stone shelf. A full cycle of seasons. The older woman had become more than a mentor, a mother figure, a confidant, a link to a cultural heritage Elizabeth embraced with humility and gratitude. Their collaboration had produced unexpected innovations. Elizabeth's medical knowledge combined with Apache healing traditions created treatments more effective than either approach alone. The soldiers have gone from the valley, came Morning Sky's voice from behind them. Elizabeth turned, noting how the man's demeanor toward her had transformed over the difficult months. Initial suspicion had given way to grudging respect, then to genuine alliance. He had become one of her strongest supporters after she successfully treated his sister's difficult childbirth, combining techniques learned in Boston with Apache birthing wisdom. Gone completely? She asked. Morning Sky nodded. The winter drives them to their forts. Swifthawk followed their trail 3 days' ride. They leave small patrols, but main force returns to Fort Bowie. The news brought cautious relief. Though their canyon sanctuary remained secret, the knowledge that military pressure had temporarily diminished eased a burden they all carried. Standing Bear should hear this, White Shell Woman said, gathering her shawl around her shoulders. He meets with the council by the upper springs. As White Shell Woman departed, Morning Sky lingered, something clearly on his mind. The child asked for you, he said finally. His fever is better, but he wants your stories. Elizabeth nodded, gathering her medicine bag. Morning Sky's son, a boy of 5 with curious eyes and a quick mind, had fallen ill the previous week. His recovery represented not just a medical success, but a personal victory. The complete acceptance of Elizabeth by a man who had once most doubted her. I'll come now, she promised. I have a new story about Boston snow and how it compares to our mountain snow. But Morning Sky's lips quirked in the closest he came to a smile. He will ask many questions. He always does. The best kind of student, Elizabeth replied, following him into the crisp winter air. After visiting the boy and leaving him with White Shell Woman, Elizabeth made her way toward the upper springs where the council gathered. The path wound through the canyon, past families going about daily tasks, women tanning hides, men repairing tools, children carrying water. Elizabeth. Standing Bear's voice reached her before she saw him, standing on a ledge overlooking the canyon. He extended his hand, helping her negotiate the final steep approach. In the months since their arrival, their relationship had deepened in ways both public and private. The community acknowledged them as a pair now, their union not marked by ceremony, but by the simple reality of their shared dwelling, their united purpose, their evident devotion. Morning Sky brings news, she said, accepting his steady hand. The soldiers have withdrawn to Fort Bowie for winter. Standing Bear nodded, his expression revealing the weight he carried daily. It gives us time, not solution, but time. They stood together, surveying the community below, their people, for Elizabeth thought of them as hers now too. She had crossed a boundary that few white women ever approached, much less embraced. She lived fully in this world, while carrying the knowledge and skills of her former life. "I've been thinking," she said, her hand finding his with the easy familiarity that had grown between them. "About spring." "What thoughts?" he asked, his thumb tracing small circles on her palm. "We should send a message to Lieutenant Davis when the snow melts. He seemed more reasonable than Reynolds, more open to understanding." Standing Bear considered this. "To what purpose?" "To negotiate properly," Elizabeth explained. "Not surrender, not retreat, but true negotiation. There must be a way for your people to maintain their identity, their traditions, without endless conflict." "Our people," he corrected gently. "And yes, perhaps there is a way, but it will not be easy." "Nothing worthwhile ever is," she replied. As the winter sun began its early descent, they made their way back down to the main encampment. Cooking fires dotted the gathering darkness, the scent of pine smoke and roasting meat filling the air. Tala waved from where she sat, with other young women learning traditional beadwork, her nimble fingers creating patterns that told stories without words. That evening, as the community gathered to share the evening meal, an elderly man began to sing, a slow, melodic chant that spoke of endurance, of ancestors, of survival against odds. Others joined, voices rising and falling in ancient harmonies. Sitting beside Standing Bear, watching firelight play across the faces of those who had become her family, Elizabeth felt the final pieces of her identity settle into place. She was not the woman who had arrived desperate at the trading post, nor was she simply an adopted Apache. She existed in a space between, drawing strength from both worlds. Later, as they prepared for sleep in their shared dwelling, Standing Bear reached into a small pouch and withdrew her wedding ring. The gold band that had once almost purchased mere survival now transformed into something else entirely. "I have kept this," he said, holding it in his palm, waiting for the right moment. Elizabeth looked at the ring, then at the man before her. Strong, principled, the leader who had recognized her value when she herself had forgotten it. "What moment is this?" she asked softly. "The moment to ask if you would accept a different ring," he replied. "One made by my hands to honor both your worlds." From a fold in his clothing, he produced a simple band fashioned from silver, a metal sacred to the Apache, etched with symbols that combined his cultural patterns with elements she recognized from her Boston life. Elizabeth's breath caught. "It's beautiful. Like the woman who bridged worlds," he said, his voice low with emotion rarely displayed so openly. "If you accept this, you accept not just me, but the uncertain path we walk together." "I accepted that path the moment I placed my wedding ring in your hand at the trading post," Elizabeth replied, extending her finger, "though I didn't know it then." Standing Bear slipped the silver band onto her finger, then pressed his forehead gently to hers, an intimate gesture that, in Apache tradition, connected spirits more profoundly than any kiss. "Two worlds," he murmured. "One heart." Outside, the winter stars gleamed over the canyon, silent witnesses to the unlikely union that defied boundaries, prejudices, and the weight of history. Elizabeth Holloway, once desperate and alone, had found not just survival, but purpose. Not just purpose, but love. Not just love, but home. In the space between worlds where the truly brave dare to dwell. And in that sheltered canyon, as snow began to fall softly beyond the dwelling's entrance, she made a silent promise to use every skill, every connection, every ounce of courage to ensure that this fragile piece, this hard-won community, would find a way to endure beyond the winter into a spring of new possibilities. For gold might measure wealth in the white man's world, but here, In this place of ancient wisdom and hard-earned trust, the true currency was knowledge freely shared, healing freely given, and love that recognized no boundaries. Elizabeth had offered her last valuable thing that day at the trading post, never imagining that in return she would receive everything that mattered.